The heat was unbearable. It was the kind of August heat that settled into your bones, wrapping around you like a thick, suffocating blanket. The air was heavy, unmoving, and the sun beat down on my back as if it had a personal vendetta against me. I had been hiking for hours, sweat soaking through my shirt, dampening the waistband of my pants, and making my backpack straps stick to my shoulders. I had started early in the morning, fresh out of college, eager to explore the remote mountains near my new home. I didn't know anyone in the area yet, and hiking was my way of escaping the loneliness. It was something I had always enjoyed, getting away from the noise, the schedules, the expectations of daily life. Out here, there was nothing but the sound of my boots crunching against the dry dirt and the occasional rustling of unseen animals in the brush. The trail I had chosen wasn't an official one. It was an old herding path that twisted through a valley, following the course of a small stream. The area was designated wilderness, meaning very few people ever wandered this deep into the mountains. It was exactly what I was looking for: pure solitude. The stream ran parallel to my path, glistening under the afternoon sun, a thin ribbon of clear water cutting through the greenery. Spruce trees lined its banks, their tall, needled branches swaying gently, providing scattered patches of shade. The smell of pine resin and damp earth hung in the air. Tall grass grew in thick clumps along the water's edge, reaching up to my thighs, brushing against my pants as I walked. I had made the mistake of wearing long pants, worried about ticks in the grass. Now, with the relentless sun pressing down, I was regretting it. My shirt was soaked, my mouth dry, and every step felt heavier than the last. Then I reached the bend in the river. It was perfect. A wide curve in the stream created a deep, slow-moving pool, bordered by smooth river rocks. The water was dark and inviting, the surface broken only by the occasional ripple from a passing insect. It looked impossibly refreshing. Without a second thought, I stripped off my clothes. I wasn't worried about anyone stumbling upon me. No one hiked this far out. There were no cabins, no campsites, no marked trails. Just me and the wilderness. I stepped into the water, expecting it to be cool, but the shock of it still took my breath away. It was ice cold, the kind of cold that bit into your skin, wrapping around your legs like a living thing. My muscles tensed instantly, but after a few seconds, the relief was overwhelming. I waded in deeper, letting the chill erase the heat from my body. The water rose past my knees, then my waist, then up to my chest. I stood there, letting the current swirl around me, feeling the weight of the day melt away. My breathing slowed, my heartbeat steadied. It was the best decision I had made all day. And then curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see what was around the bend. The water was deep enough to wade through quietly, my feet barely disturbing the surface. The current was slow, gentle, and as I moved forward, I felt invisible, blending into the surroundings. I rounded the bend carefully, peering around the trees, and that's when I saw it. A massive bull moose standing in the water. He was close, too close, less than 50 feet away, his massive head lowered as he drank from the stream. His dark brown coat was thick, almost black in the shaded light, and his antlers were enormous, sprawling out from his skull like twisted branches. His muscles shifted beneath his skin with every small movement, every shift of weight. I stopped breathing. A moose isn't like a deer. A moose is an absolute tank. A living, breathing wall of muscle, bone, and pure power. People always think of bears as the big danger in the woods, but a moose, especially a bull, was something else entirely. They were unpredictable.
Territorial.
And if he saw me as a threat, I wouldn't stand a chance. I felt a slow, creeping panic crawl up my spine. I had to get out of here, but I couldn't make a sound. Every instinct screamed at me to move, but my body wouldn't listen. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat, the cold water no longer comforting but suffocating. The moose took another slow drink, the water dripping from his mouth. I turned, moving as carefully as I could, each step slow and deliberate. The water felt heavier now, thick and unrelenting. My breathing was too loud. I wanted to run. I wanted to be anywhere but here. Every exhale came with a whispered, shaky, "I don't want to die." I don't know why I kept saying it, but I did. A quiet, desperate mantra under my breath, as if the words themselves would keep me safe. I reached the shore, grabbing my clothes with shaking hands. My body was still wet, my skin ice cold, but I didn't care. I needed to move. I needed to get out. I ran, naked, barefoot, crashing through the trees like a panicked animal. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Twigs and sharp rocks stabbed into my feet, branches slapped against my arms and chest, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. I ran until my legs burned, until my breath came in ragged, uneven gasps. Only then did I stop long enough to pull on my underwear and shoes, my hands trembling so badly that I fumbled with the laces. I didn't care about my pants, my shirt, just enough to run without completely destroying my feet. I kept going. By the time I reached my car, my lungs felt like they were on fire, my legs weak, my entire body shaking. I collapsed against the door, sucking in deep, desperate breaths. My hands were still trembling so badly I struggled to get the keys out of my backpack. I sat there for what felt like forever, the inside of the car suffocatingly hot, but I didn't care. I needed a moment. I needed to let the reality of what had just happened sink in. I had been alone in the water, completely exposed, with a bull moose just feet away. If he had seen me, if he had charged, I swallowed hard, pushing the thought away. It was over. I was safe. I sat there until the shaking stopped, until my breathing slowed, until my heart settled into something resembling a normal rhythm. Then, finally, I started the car and drove home. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to explain it. All I knew was that I had gotten lucky, stupidly, unbelievably lucky, and I wasn't sure I'd ever go hiking alone again. I was 18 years old, stupid, and full of confidence I hadn't earned. That's how most bad ideas start. There were 5 of us, me and 4 other guys, all between 17 and 18, heading into the Smoky Mountains for what we thought would be a fun, challenging hike. It was the mid-'80s, before Gatlinburg became the tourist trap it is today, back when it still had that rough, backwoods feel. We pulled into town in my best friend's car, a beat-up old sedan that probably shouldn't have made the drive in the first place. We stopped at a gas station, stretching our legs, grabbing snacks, completely unaware of how unprepared we were for what lay ahead. That's when we saw him. An old man was leaning up against the side of the building, dressed in worn-out overalls and a filthy jacket. His teeth were either rotted out or missing completely, and he had the kind of leathery skin that only comes from a lifetime of working outside. He eyed us as we loaded up, then muttered, "I wouldn't head up there. Thar's a storm a-brewin'." I was 18. I thought I knew everything. So I laughed, adjusted my backpack, and said, "Oh, it's fine. We've got rain parkas." The old man didn't say anything else. He just stared at us like we were already dead men. We had mapped out our hike ahead of time, but we hadn't really studied it. The first stretch was basically straight up a mountain, and parts of it were more like climbing a ladder than hiking. We hadn't been on the trail for more than an hour before the sky started turning gray. The air grew damp, heavy. Then, out of nowhere, the rain came. Not a light drizzle, not something you could just pull your hood up against. It was freezing rain, driven by wind so strong it felt like needles against my skin. Within minutes, the trail turned into a slick mess of mud and wet leaves. We kept going because we didn't know any better. We weren't even halfway to our planned campsite when the rain turned to snow flurries. By the time we reached the site, our clothes were soaked through. My fingers were stiff, nearly useless. I tried to untie my hiking boots but couldn't manage it. My hands were too numb, too shaky. I ended up pulling out a tree saw from my pack and sawing through the laces because I couldn't even get my pocket knife open. I still remember how stupid I felt, struggling with something that should have been simple. The 5 of us crammed into our tent and sealed it up as tightly as we could. It was miserable. Every breath we took added more condensation to the inside, and soon enough, frost was forming on the tent walls. The wind howled outside, and all night we heard loud cracks and crashes, like something big was snapping in half and falling. We assumed it was just branches breaking under the weight of the ice, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about those towering trees above us. I was afraid that at any moment, one of them would come crashing down and crush us in our sleep. Somehow I drifted off. I woke up to an awful realization. I had left my boots by the fire. In my half-frozen, exhausted state the night before, I had stupidly thought they would dry out there. Instead, they had frozen solid. The leather had curled up, stiff and useless. My socks were damp, and stepping into them felt like dipping my feet in ice water. Outside the tent, there were 4 inches of fresh snow. The landscape looked completely different. Everything was buried, and our tracks from the previous day were gone. Worse, we all knew we were experiencing some level of hypothermia. We weren't just cold, we were shaking uncontrollably, sluggish and confused. I remember struggling just to pack up my gear because my brain felt like it was moving in slow motion. We looked at our options. We could either turn back and hike 5 miles in the condition we were in, or push forward for 3 miles to the next checkpoint, where we knew there was supposed to be a bridge crossing the river. The shorter route made sense, so we pressed on. The trail was easier to follow than I expected, even with the fresh snow. The only real problem was that none of us could feel our fingers, and every few minutes, one of us would have to stop and stomp our feet to keep the blood moving. After about an hour and a half, we finally reached the river. And that's when we saw the bridge, or rather, where the bridge used to be. It was gone. The storm had taken it out completely. The only thing left was the skeletal remains of the wooden posts sticking up out of the water. That was the moment we realized how screwed we really were. We had 2 choices: hike 7 miles back the way we came, or wade across the river. None of us wanted to spend another 6 hours stumbling through the snow, so we made a plan. We'd strip down to our underwear, shove our pants into the straps of our backpacks, and wade across, holding our gear over our heads. The water was moving fast. I could see the current swirling around rocks, creating little whirlpools and eddies. It looked about 4 feet deep, but it was hard to tell. We went in one by one. The second my legs hit that water, I lost my breath. It was so cold it felt like knives stabbing into my skin. I took another step and slipped on a rock, nearly going under. By the time I was halfway across, I wasn't even thinking anymore. My body had gone into survival mode. Just move forward. Don't stop. Don't fall. Everyone slipped. Every single one of us went under at some point. When that water hit my scrotum, I thought I was going to black out from the pain. But we made it across. All of us, except for my best friend's pants. Somewhere in that freezing water, the river had ripped them free from his backpack. His pants, along with his wallet, our only car keys, and the $200 we needed to get home were gone. Panic set in fast. We ran barefoot through the snow, scanning the riverbank, hoping to see them caught on a branch or washed up on shore. But they were gone. We were soaked, freezing, and stranded. There was nothing left to do but hike back down the mountain, 7 miles in wet clothes with no food and no money. We were beyond miserable. My boots were practically useless, frozen so stiff I could barely bend my feet. My best friend hiked in his underwear, using his jacket to cover himself as best he could. Eventually, we made it to the road and managed to hitch a ride into town with a local. I don't remember much about that ride. I was so cold I could barely think. When we finally got to a hotel, we must have looked like hell because the woman at the front desk took one look at us and, without even asking for payment, gave us a room. She even fed us, trusting that our parents would wire money and FedEx a spare set of keys. We spent the next 24 hours wrapped in blankets, trying to stop shaking. Looking back, I don't know how none of us ended up in a hospital. We had been dangerously close to real hypothermia, but somehow we made it through. The next morning, we sat by the hotel window, watching the trees sway under the weight of the ice. That was when we realized what we had been hearing all night. Branches weren't just breaking, entire trees had been cracking under the pressure. We had spent the night in a forest that had been collapsing around us. I never saw that old man at the gas station again, but I still think about what he said. "Thar's a storm a brewin'. I should have listened." There's something about solo hiking that has always called to me. The solitude, the raw connection to nature, the feeling of complete independence. It's an experience I cherish. That's why I had planned a 3-day solo trip deep into the Rockies. No marked trails, no other hikers, just me, my backpack, and miles of untouched wilderness. I had done my research. I had my map, my GPS, and enough supplies to last me longer than planned, just in case. The weather forecast was clear, and I was in good shape. There was no reason to worry. I arrived at the trailhead in the late morning, the sun bright and warm overhead. My truck was the only vehicle in the dirt parking area, which was exactly what I expected. The place I was heading was remote, far from the popular hiking destinations. Strapping on my pack, I took one last look at my truck before stepping onto the trail, feeling the familiar rush of excitement mixed with anticipation. The first few hours were perfect. The air was crisp. The sound of birds and rustling leaves filled the silence, and I felt at peace. The path was rugged but manageable, winding through thick forests of pine and aspen, occasionally opening to breathtaking views of the mountains stretching endlessly into the distance. I made good progress. By mid-afternoon, I had left the marked trail entirely, following an old hunting path that I had read about. It was overgrown but still visible, leading me deeper into the wilderness. As the sun began its slow descent, I found a spot near a small, clear river to set up camp. The area was flat, surrounded by tall trees, and far enough from the water to avoid condensation issues overnight. I pitched my tent, gathered some firewood, and settled in for the evening. The loneliness didn't bother me. In fact, I enjoyed it. As I ate my simple meal of dehydrated food and sipped water from my canteen, I watched the sky darken, the first stars appearing between the treetops. The only sounds were the gentle flow of the river and the distant hoot of an owl. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. I woke suddenly, heart pounding. I wasn't sure why at first. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not the scurrying of an animal or the movement of wind through the trees. These were slow, deliberate human footsteps. I held my breath, listening. Crunch, crunch. The sound of someone walking, moving through the underbrush just outside my tent. A wave of cold fear washed over me. I had seen no one all day. No other hikers, no distant campsites, nothing. There shouldn't have been anyone out here. I reached slowly for my knife, the only weapon I had within reach. My fingers wrapped around the handle, my pulse pounding in my ears. The footsteps stopped. Silence. For what felt like an eternity, I stayed completely still, straining to hear anything over the sound of my own breathing. Then, just as I convinced myself that maybe it was just my imagination, that I had been dreaming, the footsteps started again. Closer. My mouth went dry. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to act. In one swift motion, I unzipped the tent and shined my flashlight outside. Nothing. The forest was empty, the ground undisturbed, no signs of movement. I swept the beam in every direction, my hands shaking. Still nothing. I listened, waiting, my muscles tensed. Silence. Slowly, hesitantly, I zipped the tent back up, my mind racing. I knew what I had heard. I wasn't imagining it. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Morning came, bringing with it the safety of daylight, but the uneasy feeling in my gut remained. As I packed up my gear, I searched the ground around my campsite, looking for any signs of footprints. There were none. That wasn't possible. The ground here was soft, covered in loose dirt and fallen leaves. If someone had walked near my tent, there should have been tracks. I tried to shake the unease, telling myself I had imagined it. Maybe I had been half dreaming. Maybe it had just been an animal, and my mind had exaggerated the sound in my half-asleep state. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I continued hiking, pushing deeper into the wilderness. The further I went, the more the sense of isolation grew. By late afternoon, I had reached a dense section of forest where the trees grew so closely together that the light barely penetrated through the canopy. It was eerily quiet.
No birds.
No rustling leaves, just silence. And then I saw it. A tree, not far off the trail, with something carved into the bark. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. It was a single word, scratched deep into the wood. Leave. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. The carving was fresh. The edges of the letters were clean, not yet worn by time or weather. Someone had done this recently. Suddenly, the forest around me felt suffocating. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every rustling leaf sent a spike of adrenaline through my veins. I forced myself to keep moving, my pace quickening. I needed to get out of here. By the time I set up camp again, the sun was already setting. I chose a spot on a slight incline, giving me a clear view of the surrounding area. I built a fire, more for comfort than warmth. I needed the light. I sat close to the flames, my knife within reach, scanning the darkness. The forest remained silent, too silent. Then, the footsteps came back, slow, deliberate, crunching through the underbrush. I clenched my knife, my knuckles white. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the noise. Nothing. I swept the light in every direction. The trees stood still, the ground undisturbed. But I knew I had heard it. Then my stomach dropped. Beyond the reach of my flashlight, something moved. A shadow shifting just beyond the trees. I didn't wait. I shoved everything I could into my pack, leaving behind my tent and anything I couldn't grab in seconds. I moved fast, half running through the darkness, my flashlight bouncing wildly. Branches snapped behind me. Something was following. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. For miles, I pushed forward, fueled by sheer terror, until finally, I reached my truck. I threw my pack into the back, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. Then I saw it. Fresh footprints in the dirt, leading away from my truck, back into the forest. I never hiked that trail again. There's a kind of silence you only find deep in the wilderness. A silence so complete that it feels almost unnatural. I had been hiking for most of the day when I first noticed it, the absence of sound. At first, I thought I had imagined it. I stopped walking, took a sip from my water bottle, and listened. No wind, no rustling leaves, no birds calling from the trees, just my own breathing, the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. It was early fall, and the Olympic National Forest stretched out around me in endless waves of green. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles, and the trail beneath my boots was packed with soft soil, still slightly damp from the previous night's rain. I had planned this trip for months. 4 days, 3 nights, deep in one of the most isolated parts of the Pacific Northwest. I wanted solitude, an escape from the weight of daily life. I told myself I wasn't afraid to be alone out here. I had done solo hikes before, though never this deep into the backcountry. But now, as I stood there in the eerie stillness, an unease settled over me. I shook it off and kept moving. The first day passed without incident. I followed the trail as it wound through dense forest, across small wooden bridges spanning shallow streams. I saw no one, not a single other hiker. That was expected. I had deliberately chosen a route that was rarely traveled. By the time I reached my campsite, the sun was beginning to sink below the tree line. The designated camping area was nothing more than a clearing beside a small lake, surrounded by towering fir trees. I set up my tent, collected some firewood, and boiled water for dinner. As I ate, the silence returned. I told myself it was normal, just part of being alone in the wild. But that night, as I sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was watching me. I woke early, muscles stiff from the cold. The fire had long since died, leaving only embers. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting the trees like a mirror. As I packed up my gear, the unease from the night before lingered. I hadn't heard anything unusual, but I had felt something, that strange, creeping awareness of being watched. I should have turned back. I should have packed up and hiked straight back to my car. But I didn't. The second day's hike was more difficult. The trail became steeper, the trees denser. The deeper I went, the stronger the feeling became. Something was out there. By midday, I noticed small things. Branches snapping when I wasn't moving. A rock tumbling down a ridge with no explanation. The kind of things that, under normal circumstances, I might have ignored. But alone, miles from anyone, they took on a different meaning. I kept moving, trying to ignore it. But my pace quickened, as if some unseen force was pushing me forward. I reached my second campsite earlier than expected. A small clearing nestled between thick trees. There was no lake this time, just an expanse of forest stretching in all directions. As I set up camp, the feeling of being watched intensified. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, it was unbearable. I forced myself to eat, though my stomach was tight with unease. Every few minutes, I would glance up from my food, scanning the tree line. My ears strained for any sound, any movement. And then, as the fire flickered, I saw it. A figure standing just inside the shadows of the trees. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I blinked, my heart slamming against my ribs. But the figure was still there. It was tall, unmoving, just standing there, watching. A chill crawled up my spine. My mouth went dry. I slowly reached for my flashlight, but my hands trembled as I clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the spot where the figure had been. There was nothing there. I scanned the trees, my breath shallow. The underbrush was undisturbed. No sign of footprints. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I swallowed hard. Maybe it had been a trick of the firelight. Maybe exhaustion was making me see things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. That night, I lay in my tent, staring at the fabric ceiling, gripping my knife so tightly my knuckles ached. Every small sound outside sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I didn't sleep. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision. I would cut my trip short. I didn't care that I was only halfway through my planned route. Something was out there. I packed up as quickly as I could and started hiking. As I moved, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The trees felt closer, the silence heavier. The trail seemed longer than I remembered. And then I saw them. Footprints. They weren't mine. They were fresh, pressed into the damp soil. And they followed the trail, but they weren't leading away. They were coming toward me. A wave of cold terror washed over me. Someone had been following me. I started moving faster, then faster still until I was practically jogging. The weight of my pack slowed me down, but I didn't stop. I felt it behind me, Not just a presence, a certainty. Something was there. I forced myself to stop once, only for a second, just to catch my breath. I turned, scanning the trees, sweat dripping down my back despite the cold. And then I saw it again. The figure, closer this time, it stood at the edge of the trail, motionless. I couldn't see its face, only its outline against the trees. I ran. I ran harder than I ever have in my life. Branches tore at my clothes. My legs screamed in protest. My backpack bounced against me, but I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned, until my vision blurred, until the only thing I could hear was the thunder of my own heartbeat. When I finally stumbled out onto the road where my car was parked, I collapsed onto my knees, gasping for air. I twisted around, expecting to see someone or something burst from the tree line, but there was nothing, just the forest, silent, watching. I threw my gear into the car, shaking so hard I could barely get the key into the ignition. As I pulled away, I made the mistake of looking into my rearview mirror, and for just a second, I swear I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching me leave. I have never gone hiking alone again, and I never will. The Utah desert was beautiful, vast, and completely indifferent to human life. I was hiking alone, something I had done dozens of times before. This was my time away from everything. Work stress, city noise, people. Just me, my backpack, and the land stretching in every direction. The air was dry, the kind that cracked your lips no matter how much water you drank. The sandstone cliffs loomed overhead, their deep red hues burning in the late afternoon sun. I had been walking for hours, the heat radiating off the rocks making the whole landscape feel like an oven. I was following a loosely marked trail, one that had been carved out by occasional hikers and weather rather than official maintenance. The plan was to reach a small canyon where I'd set up camp for the night. I wasn't in a rush. The sun was still high, and I had plenty of daylight left. That was when I saw it. A small, dark opening in the rock face ahead. It wasn't part of my planned route, but something about it caught my attention. A natural cave, maybe? I wasn't sure. It was a narrow entrance, just wide enough for someone to squeeze through. There were no signs or markings, just a shadowy hole leading into the unknown. I stopped a few feet away, staring at it. The blackness inside was absolute. My instincts told me it was just another natural formation, nothing special. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially in the wilderness. I took a cautious step forward. I checked my phone, no signal. Not surprising. Out here, you could go for miles without service. I wasn't worried. I had my map, a compass, extra water, and a strong flashlight in my pack. Still, my gut told me this wasn't a good idea. I brushed the feeling off. The opening was just large enough for me to crawl into, so I dropped my pack outside and grabbed my flashlight. I took a deep breath, crouched down, and stepped inside. Immediately, the temperature dropped. The cool air rushed over my skin, a welcome relief from the heat outside. My breath sounded louder in the confined space. The walls were rough, cold, and damp to the touch. I shined my flashlight ahead. The passageway curved downward, just enough to obscure what lay beyond. I took a few careful steps forward. The silence was unnerving. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of my breathing and the faint scrape of my boots on the stone floor. As I moved deeper, the walls seemed to close in. I ran my fingers along the surface. Limestone, smooth in some areas, jagged in others. The tunnel twisted and narrowed, forcing me to crouch lower. The deeper I went, the more my nerves began to hum. Something about this place felt wrong. I was maybe 50 feet in when I heard it. A faint scraping sound. I froze. Came from deeper in the tunnel. A slow, deliberate sound, like stone dragging against stone. My body went rigid. I held my breath, listening. Nothing, just my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe a loose rock shifting. The desert was full of odd acoustics, whined through canyons, echoes playing tricks on the mind. I pushed forward. The tunnel was getting tighter, forcing me to crouch even lower. The walls felt closer, the darkness thicker. My flashlight flickered slightly, but I shook it and it steadied. The air was cooler now, damp, carrying a faint earthy smell. Then I heard it again, the same scraping sound, closer this time. I stopped again, every muscle in my body tensed. This wasn't an echo. It wasn't wind. Something was moving in here with me. I turned back immediately. This wasn't right. I twisted around, ready to retrace my steps, and smacked my head against the ceiling. The tunnel was tighter than I remembered. Panic surged through me as I stumbled, catching myself against the rough stone wall. My flashlight nearly slipped from my grip. I sucked in a sharp breath, steadying myself. Focus. I turned my flashlight toward the way I had come. The entrance was still visible, a small circle of light in the distance. I wasn't as deep as I thought. I could get out. I started moving faster now, but the second I took a step, I heard it again. The scraping was right behind me now. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing. The tunnel was empty, just cold stone and shadows. I forced myself to breathe. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had to be. I turned back toward the entrance and froze. The tunnel looked different. I could still see the light outside, but the path back felt longer, more twisted. The walls seemed to have shifted, subtly narrowing. Panic gripped me. I started moving fast, practically crawling now, my shoulders scraping against the stone. The entrance felt impossibly far away. Then my foot caught on something. I went down hard, my flashlight clattering against the rock. My hands scraped against the ground, pain flaring up my arms. The light rolled a few feet ahead, its beam flickering. And in that flickering light, I saw something move, a shadow just beyond the flashlight's reach. My stomach clenched. My skin went ice cold. Something was in here with me. I lunged for the flashlight, my fingers barely gripping the metal casing before I yanked it up, heart hammering. I swung the beam wildly. Nothing. The tunnel was empty. But I knew. I had seen something. A shape, a movement. The walls felt like they were closing in. My breathing was too fast, too shallow. I needed to get out. Now, I scrambled forward, crawling on hands and knees, the rock tearing at my palms. Every sound felt magnified. My breath, my heartbeat, the scraping of my clothes against the stone. I could see the entrance now just a few feet ahead. The sunlight outside looked impossibly bright, a beacon of safety. Then, a whisper, right behind me, a breath against my neck. I exploded forward, shoving myself through the last few feet of the tunnel, my body twisting, my clothes snagging. And then, I was out. I tumbled onto the hot desert sand, gasping for air, my skin covered in cold sweat. I scrambled backward, away from the cave, my eyes locked on the entrance. The darkness inside was still, silent. Nothing followed me, but the whisper, I had heard it. I grabbed my pack, still shaking, and stumbled away. I didn't look back, not once. I hiked for miles, refusing to stop until I was far from that cave. To this day, I don't know what was in there. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe the echoes of the cave distorted some distant sound. Or maybe something was in there waiting, and I had almost been trapped with it. I never told anyone about the cave. I never marked it on a map, because some places are meant to stay hidden. I don't scare easily. I've spent years hiking alone, deep in the backcountry, miles from civilization. I've had close encounters with bears, nearly lost my way in whiteout conditions, and even fallen into a freezing river once. I know fear, but nothing has ever unnerved me like what happened on this trip. It was a late September afternoon when I set out on a 3-day trek through a remote section of the Appalachian Mountains. The air was crisp, the leaves were beginning to turn, and the trails were empty, just how I liked them. I had mapped out a route that would take me deep into the forest, away from the popular trails. My plan was to camp 2 nights at different spots, enjoying the solitude before looping back to my truck. I had all the gear I needed: a sturdy tent, plenty of food, a GPS, and a knife just in case. The first day went smoothly. I covered about 12 miles, following a rugged path that cut through thick forest, crossed a few shallow creeks, and climbed gradually into higher elevations. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. Perfect spot to set up camp. As I pitched my tent and started gathering wood for a small fire, I felt something strange, an unease creeping up my spine. At first, I ignored it. I was deep in the woods, alone. Of course, it was quiet. Of course, the air felt heavy. But the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. Then I saw him. Across the valley, standing high on a ridge directly opposite my campsite, was a lone figure. I froze, heart pounding. He was far away, too far to make out any details, but there was no doubt about it. Someone was standing there, motionless, looking in my direction. I stared for what felt like forever, trying to process what I was seeing. Was it a hiker? A hunter? Maybe a backpacker who, like me, had wandered deep into the wilderness? But why was he just standing there? The longer I watched, the more uneasy I became. He wasn't moving. He wasn't setting up camp. He was just there. I forced myself to look away, shaking off the chill creeping through me. I focused on my fire, convincing myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just taking in the view. Maybe he hadn't even noticed me. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, I dared to glance back at the ridge. He was still there. My stomach twisted. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The fire crackled beside me, the warmth doing nothing to chase away the cold not forming in my gut. I told myself again and again that there was no reason to be afraid. This was public land. People hiked here, but that voice of reason was drowned out by a deeper, more primal fear. Why hadn't he moved? As darkness swallowed the forest, I crawled into my tent, zipping it up tight. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing on the ridge, watching. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up hours later to the sound of twigs snapping. My breath hitched. I lay completely still, straining to hear over the pounding of my heartbeat. The fire had burned low, casting faint, flickering shadows against the tent walls. Snap. Closer this time. I gripped my knife, barely breathing. Was it an animal? A deer? A raccoon? My mind screamed at me not to look, but I couldn't help it. Slowly, carefully, I unzipped the tent just an inch and peeked outside. The fire's dying embers cast a dim glow on the trees. Nothing. No movement. No sound. And then I looked up at the ridge. My stomach dropped. The figure was gone. A wave of pure, bone-deep terror crashed over me. I scrambled out of my tent, shining my flashlight wildly into the trees. Nothing. Just silence. Just darkness. I wanted to run, pack up and get the hell out of there. But where would I go? Hiking back in the dark was dangerous. My best option was to wait until morning. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the fire, knife in hand, eyes darting at every rustling leaf, every shifting shadow. By dawn, I was exhausted but determined. I needed to move. I packed up quickly, forcing myself to eat a granola bar despite my churning stomach. As I hoisted my pack onto my shoulders, I did one last scan of the ridge. Empty. The rational part of my brain told me I had imagined it. A trick of the light, an oddly shaped tree, but my gut told me otherwise. I hiked fast that day, pushing myself to cover more ground than planned. I wanted to put as much distance as possible between me and that place. The trees blurred past me as I followed the trail higher into the mountains. By late afternoon, I found another spot to camp, a small clearing surrounded by dense trees. I built a fire, set up my tent, and forced myself to relax. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The silence was different here, thicker, pressed in around me. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But then I saw them. Footprints, fresh, in the dirt, around my campsite. I hadn't seen or heard anyone all day. The trail was barely used. So whose prints were these? My throat went dry. I crouched down, examining them closer. The tracks were deep. Whoever made them had been standing there for a long time, watching. A rustling sound snapped me out of my thoughts. My head jerked up. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, but something felt off. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my pack, stomped out the fire, and started hiking. I didn't care if it got dark. I was getting out. Every step, I expected to hear footsteps behind me, to see movement in the trees. I didn't stop. I didn't rest. I hiked until my legs burned, until my lungs ached. Hours later, I reached a familiar landmark, the final stretch before the trailhead. Relief flooded me. I was almost there, but then I made the mistake of looking back. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, still, watching. My legs nearly gave out. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. As I threw my pack inside and yanked open the door, I glanced at the tree line one last time. The figure was gone. I slammed the door shut and sped down the dirt road, not looking back. I don't know who or what I saw out there. I don't know why they watched me, why they left no trace except those footprints. But I do know one thing: I will never hike alone again. The plan was simple, just a short overnight hike, nothing extreme. I wanted solitude, fresh air, and the kind of exhaustion that only a good trail could bring. I picked a well-mapped route in the mountains, a 6-mile loop with a moderate climb, a scenic overlook, and a peaceful campsite by a lake. I started mid-morning, the crisp mountain air cooling my skin as I hiked through dense forest. The trail was quiet, just the occasional rustle of leaves or the chirping of birds. The scent of pine filled the air, and the soft crunch of my boots on dirt was the only sound I could hear. It was exactly what I needed. A few hours in, I reached a clearing where the path split. The signpost ahead pointed forward, confirming the trail I was following. But just to the left, another trail branched off. A wooden arrow, nailed haphazardly to a tree, pointed down that path. The wood was old, cracked from years of exposure, and the paint had almost completely worn away. I checked my map. There was no second trail. I should have ignored it. I should have kept going. But I was curious. How had I never heard about this? A hidden trail? Maybe an old route that had been forgotten? Something about it felt off, too narrow, too overgrown. But I figured I'd check it out, follow it for a bit, then turn back if it led nowhere. I took the path. First, it was fine. The ground was firm, the incline gentle, the air even quieter than before. But as I continued, the trees grew denser. The trail started feeling wrong. The air seemed thicker, the light dimmer even though the sun was still high. The worst part was the silence. No wind.
No birds.
No rustling of leaves. I stopped, suddenly aware of how alone I was. I turned around, ready to go back. But when I did, the trail behind me looked different. The trees, the slope, the rocks, I didn't recognize them. My footprints, which should have been in the dirt, were gone. My stomach clenched. I had only walked a few minutes. I wasn't lost. Couldn't be. I retraced my steps anyway, pushing through underbrush, convinced I'd see the original trail again. But after what felt like an hour of walking, I didn't find it. Instead, I found something else. The campsite appeared out of nowhere, sitting just off the trail like it had been waiting for me. It wasn't new. The tent, if it could even be called that, was collapsed, the fabric torn and covered in moss. Rusted camping gear lay scattered in the dirt. A metal cooking pot, dented and blackened. A boot, half buried in the soil. And a sleeping bag. It was zipped up, its once bright fabric faded by time. I don't know why, but I didn't want to touch it. I stood there, staring, my breath coming faster. Who had been here? How long ago? Why had they left everything behind? I reached for my phone to take a picture. Proof that I wasn't imagining this. No signal. Not surprising, given how deep I was, but it still sent a chill through me. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. I needed to leave. I turned and walked quickly back the way I came, refusing to look over my shoulder. I focused on my breathing, on moving forward, but the trail just kept going. I walked for hours. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the ground. I should have been back by now. I should have seen the clearing where I first turned. Instead, the trees got thicker, the air colder. I stopped, listened, and heard it. Footsteps, not mine, slow, deliberate, somewhere in the trees to my right. I spun around, my chest tight. Nothing, but the sound was still there, moving, circling. I gripped the knife on my belt, heart hammering. Someone was out here, watching me, following me. I broke into a run. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed. The footsteps faded behind me, lost in the sound of my own pounding heart. Then the trees opened up, and I was back at the same abandoned campsite. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against a tree, my knife clutched in my hand. My headlamp was on, the beam casting weak light into the darkness. Every so often, I'd hear something, twigs snapping, the soft crunch of leaves. At some point, exhaustion won. My eyes closed. When I woke up, the sun was barely up. The forest was silent, too silent. I forced myself to move. My body ached, my throat dry. I had a small water bottle, but it wouldn't last long. I had to find my way back. I walked, again. The trees blurred together, each one looking like the last. But I kept going, my head pounding, my thoughts racing. Then I saw it, a figure, far down the trail, standing between the trees. I froze. It wasn't moving. It wasn't walking. It was just standing there. I opened my mouth to say something, to shout, to call for help, but no sound came out. Then it took a step toward me. I turned and ran. I ran harder than before, harder than I ever had in my life. My legs burned, my vision blurred. I didn't stop until I saw the sign, the same wooden arrow, the same post. I had made it back. I stumbled onto the main trail, barely believing it. My truck was miles away, but I didn't care. I was out. I was safe. I looked back one last time. The figure stood at the edge of the trees, watching. When I finally reached my truck, I drove straight to the nearest town, hands shaking on the wheel. I told the ranger station everything, the trail, the abandoned camp, the footsteps, the figure. They listened, took notes, then exchanged a look I didn't like. "We don't have a second trail out there," one of them said. "Nothing in that area. You must have gotten turned around." I insisted. I knew what I saw. That's when they told me. 10 years ago, a group of hikers had gone missing in that same area. Their last known location? Near a trail that didn't exist. Only one body was ever found, zipped inside a sleeping bag. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about it, about the figure in the woods, still watching, still waiting,